My name is Florence. I reconnected with John, who is now my partner, at our high school reunion. Back then, we only knew each other's names and faces. But we hit it off after sitting next to each other. Soon after, we started dating, and recently John proposed to me. Now, we're planning our wedding. I had met John's father-in-law and mother-in-law a few times since we started dating, and they always welcomed me warmly. The only family member I hadn't met yet was John's sister, Sarah. However, she never seemed to come out of her room, which began to bother me. What did Sarah think of me? Don't worry about her, John tried to reassure me one day. She's just shy. I felt relieved hearing John's words, but our assumption that Sarah was simply shy turned out to be a major mistake. We're so happy that you're going to be John's wife, John's mother said enthusiastically one day. John, you've really stepped up. Make sure you make Myra happy. I will, John replied with a smile. When we finally told John's parents about our plans to get married, they were thrilled. We just need to tell Sarah too, John's mother said, leaving her seat. As John, his father, and I were chatting, a loud voice suddenly came from Sarah's room, startling us. We heard the sound of a door slamming, and then Sarah stormed into the room, glaring at me. I will never accept this marriage, she exclaimed angrily. Hold on, Sarah, John's mother said, following her. Let's talk about this. But Sarah didn't stop. Marriage is disgusting. Just the thought of having strangers in the house is bad enough, but getting married? Seriously, no way. That's just gross. Sarah's father raised his voice in anger, but Sarah ignored him. She scanned me from head to toe, crossed her arms, and snorted. John's taste in women is just awful. Why on earth would he marry someone as unattractive as you? Just thinking about what the kids would look like sends shivers down my spine. Can John even handle raising a child like this? Of course he can. What are you even saying, sis? John interjected, clearly upset. Anyway, I'm against this marriage. I don't want her in our family. If you dare show your face here ever again. At Sarah's outburst, John and his parents scrambled in panic, trying to silence her. Their voices seemed to echo from far away as I gathered myself. I stood up and found myself saying something I never thought I would. Fine, I won't ever come back to this house. John, I said, addressing him, I'm sorry for my sister, but I want to marry you. Yes, I still want to marry John, I continued, my voice steady. We will get married, but I will never come to this house again, and I will never seek Sarah for the rest of my life. This discussion is over, I said. I don't want you to get married. Sarah yelled angrily, but I ignored her. I started to prepare to leave. As I was walking out, I glanced back at Sarah and said firmly, I don't need your approval for the marriage. John's parents' blessing is more than enough. Rest assured, since we'll never meet again, there won't be any awkward family get-togethers. No matter how much you object, I won't give up on John. Goodbye. I'll never forget what you've said to me, I concluded with a composed expression. I bid my goodbyes to my shocked in-laws and left. John hurried after me, apologizing with a near tearful face. Once we were out of sight of his parents and Sarah, tears started to flow down my cheeks. John apologized again. It's really sad that your sister won't accept our marriage and that I can never return to that house, I confessed. But I still want to marry you, John. I'm sorry I'm not the woman Sarah thinks I should be. Holding back tears and with a trembling voice, I spoke from the heart. John hugged me tightly and whispered, You've done nothing wrong, Florence. Feeling his warmth, I reaffirmed my commitment to marrying John as I had declared. John and I eventually got married and began our life together. We had a beautiful wedding, but both of us agreed not to invite Sarah. John's parents repeatedly apologized for Sarah's behavior, but our relationship with them remained strong and supportive. Blessed by our family, except for Sarah's disapproval, John and I started our married life. However, Sarah was furious when she found out we had gotten married. She called John on our wedding night, yelling, "Why did you marry such an awful woman? This is the worst." Eventually, John put his phone aside, exhausted by the noise, and simply said, "Just leave us alone," before hanging up. Since then, our marriage has been problem-free. I had made it clear that I wouldn't visit my in-laws' place, and I hadn't been there since that day. Instead, my in-laws, concerned about our well-being, have visited us occasionally. Each time they visit, they apologize for Sarah's behavior, to which I always reply, "It's okay, I'm happy I married John." Looking back on everything, I think it's a good thing we've cut ties with Sarah, who was quite a handful. I remarked to John, if we hadn't, I shudder to think we'd still be hearing complaints from her. Just a few months into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. John was ecstatic. Even before we knew the baby's gender, he had already started buying baby clothes and reading fatherhood books. I was feeling incredibly happy. Then one day, I received a call from an unknown number. Though skeptical, I answered, thinking it might be from the maternity clinic or a local government office. However, the voice on the other end was one I didn't want to hear. "Florence, long time no see," said Sarah, my sister-in-law. "Why is Sarah calling me now, especially after she so adamantly rejected me becoming part of the family?" I thought to myself, confused. "Why?" I muttered aloud, and Sarah filled me in. "I found your number in Mom's phone," Sarah explained. "John has blocked me, so I thought I'd tell you." "Tell me what?" I asked cautiously. In a much gentler tone than I remembered, Sarah dropped a bombshell. "I'm getting married to Ronald, a classmate of yours and John's." "Ronald?" I repeated, stunned. Ronald had indeed been our high school classmate. According to Sarah, they started dating through a work connection, which happened to be Ronald. Both Sarah and Ronald worked locally, so it wasn't surprising. They crossed paths, and still, I couldn't hide my shock that Sarah, who had been so vehemently against marriage, was now planning to tie the knot. "You're getting married?" I asked, incredulous. "Yes, why the surprise?" Sarah replied casually. "Ronald will be at the next family meeting, so you both should come. It'll be weird if you weren't there." Okay, I managed to say, taken aback. Had Sarah forgotten everything she had said and done? She had yelled at me, humiliated John and her parents, and never once apologized. I felt the back of my head heat up with anger. "We'll be looking forward to it," I replied, keeping my cool. "Just so you know, don't mess this up. If you ruin my marriage with Ronald, you won't get away with it," Sarah warned. After being told off by Sarah, I stood in front of the calendar and circled the date Ronald told us he'd be coming for a family meeting at my in-laws. I waited for that day with bated breath. Days passed, and finally, the day Ronald was set to visit arrived. John and I dressed up nicely and left our house to greet him. When we reached the front of my in-laws' property, it seemed Ronald had just arrived. I saw Ronald and Sarah waving at us from their car, and John and I smiled back. "It's been a while since the wedding," Ronald remarked warmly. "Florence, John, how have you been?" "We've been good," John replied. "Florence is expecting, actually." "Really? Congratulations." Ronald greeted me with his familiar warm smile from high school. He leaned in towards my baby bump and said, "Can't wait for you to join us, little one." "Thank you. I'm not allowed inside the house anymore, so Ronald, I'm sorry, but I'll have to consider this family meeting over," I said calmly. Standing next to Ronald, Sarah looked towards the property of her in-laws and gently said, "Let us go in." No, I responded with a smile. I'm not allowed inside the house anymore, so Ronald, I'm sorry, but I have to consider this family meeting over. Ha! Sarah's face flushed with rage while Ronald looked puzzled. Realizing Ronald was clueless, I decided to clarify. When John and I came to introduce ourselves as a couple, Sarah opposed us. She said we were not welcome, that our union was disgusting, and that we should never come back. We married despite her, and that's why she didn't come to our wedding. What? Sarah told me she was sick during the wedding, Ronald interjected. That's not true, I said. Sarah, what are you talking about? Stop lying. Sarah tried to suppress her anger. I couldn't help but chuckle. I mean, come on, Sarah. You've got amnesia or something. You've made fun of me countless times. You even told me to my face that I'm ugly, said the baby I'm expecting will have my face, and questioned if John could raise such a child. Forgotten all that. Ronald, everything Florence is saying is a complete lie. What are you talking about, Florence? Stop saying stupid stuff, Sarah retorted. Just so you don't forget, let me remind you, I said firmly. I will never enter this house, and I will never forget what you've said to me. I said firmly. Sarah looked at me with cold eyes and forcibly grabbed my hand. Enough of this nonsense. Even Ronald is losing patience. Let's get inside. Corey and Ronald released my hand from Kristen's forceful grip. Sarah fell flat on her butt, looking dazed. Her pretty dress was now soiled with dirt. Ronald didn't offer her a hand and just looked down at her. Is what Florence saying true? Ronald asked, his tone serious. It's a lie, all lies. Sarah retorted. Florence has a problem with making stuff up, right, John? Sis, you're embarrassing yourself, Corey sighed. What Florence is saying is true. If you're thinking of marrying Ronald, you better acknowledge this aspect of yourself. Upon hearing John's words, Ronald paused for a moment and then started walking towards the car. Wait. Kristen chased after Ronald in her dirt-covered dress, but he wouldn't let her into the car. Maybe overstepping by intervening in my brother's marriage, but I can't consider marrying someone who insults not just me but even a child who isn't yet born, I stated firmly. No offense to the family, but I'll be going home today. We'll talk some other time, I added. Don't say that, please, Ronald pleaded. Florence, thanks for letting me know about Sarah before we got married. Ronald thanked us and drove away. Kristen chased after the car, crying along the way. She stumbled and fell, continuing to cry. You'd think her own brother John would go to help, but instead, he took my hand. Let's go. I can't let someone who yanks a pregnant woman's hand around be in the same space as Florence, Corey said as we walked back home. Sarah's cries lingered in the air after we arrived home. Corey contacted his parents-in-law, and after being advised to share our greetings, we stood at the front of the property and revealed the truth about the past. Corey explained that Sarah and Ronald's engagement had likely fallen apart. My in-laws responded sympathetically, saying it couldn't be helped. When they visited us later, I apologized for what I had done to Sarah, even if it was out of revenge. They reassured me. Don't worry, what she did was true, according to my in-laws. Kristen had isolated herself in her room ever since her engagement broke off. Ronald, who had a stable government job, ensured a stable life, but Sarah quit her job early on and is now unemployed. I heard she sneaks into the kitchen late at night to grab a meal, almost as if she's stealing it, then retreats to her room, avoiding any contact with her parents. Sarah's behavior remained unpredictable. Both John and I blocked Kristen's phone number. We moved to a bigger house in preparation for the baby on the way and specifically asked my in-laws not to share our new address with Sarah. It seemed like the right decision. After we moved, Sarah went to her old place, banging and kicking the front door, shouting to be let in. Her loud disturbance led a neighbor to call the police. Seeing Kristen causing legal trouble, my in-laws reached their wits' end. They regretted spoiling her and eventually kicked her out of their home. They provided enough money for her to live on her own for a while. Since then, I've heard Kristen has been making ends meet in a small apartment with a part-time job. As for John and me, we welcomed a healthy, beautiful baby into the world. Just as Sarah had said, our baby did resemble me, and she was an adorable little girl. Looking back at when Sarah opposed our marriage, I'm convinced that my unwavering decision to marry was the right one. Thanks to the courage I had back then to stand up to Sarah, I am now enjoying a happy life with a loving husband and our precious daughter.